Good evening. Government forces in East Pakistan surrendered today to India, bringing to an end 13 days of bitter fighting on that front. The end came quickly at a racetrack in Dacca. There, General Niazi gave up the Pakistani armed forces in the east to Indian General Singh Aurora. Niazi stripped off his epaulets and touched his forehead to Aurora's, signifying subservience. There was rejoicing in the streets of Dacca. In New Delhi, a cheering, table-thumping parliament heard Indian Prime Minister Gandhi proclaim East Pakistan a free country. She called it Bangladesh, the Bengal nation. Mrs. Gandhi also ordered a unilateral ceasefire in the West beginning tomorrow, but Pakistan's President Yahya Khan, in a nationwide broadcast, urged his people to be patient and said, "We will continue fighting not only in the front lines, but in the fields, factories, and homes." CBS News correspondent Bert Quint, who's been covering the war in the East, returned to Calcutta after today's surrender, and I talked with him by telephone. Did you get the impression that the Indian Army was pretty efficient and the Pakistani Army was not, or how would you compare this?
It wasn't so much a question of inefficiency of the Pakistani Army, Walter. It's just that they didn't have a chance from the start. Here were some 70 to 80,000 men in what amounted to a foreign country. East Pakistan is 1,300 air miles away from West Pakistan. The West Pakistanis who were flown over to put down the March uprising by the people favoring autonomy for East Pakistan were strangers. Not only were they strangers, they acted as an occupying force. They were terribly ruthless. These aren't just stories. These are things that we've seen ourselves. There were atrocities committed. So this was an occupying force, hated by the people who lived there, and the people were out to get them. And get them indeed they did in a good many cases. So here are these people, the West Pakistani soldiers, cut off from their main line of supply, surrounded by people who hated them and were out for revenge. And then along came the Indian Army, which is a pretty good army, and which terribly outnumbered and outgunned them. They simply didn't have a chance. What was interesting about this trip that we took from one end of East Pakistan to the capital was that it eliminated any doubts in my mind, at least, about what this war was all about. There had been talk by the Indians that they were in there to try to liberate the people. The Pakistanis were talking as though they were being attacked, as they were, of course. And what impressed me was all along the route of the Indian Army march, the way people turned out from little villages and greeted the Indian Army as friends, as brothers, as saviors. Now, this is not a thing that comes natural to people living in Pakistan, you know, because the Indians and the Pakistanis, even the Bengalis, have been enemies for a good many years. I'm afraid that a lot of bloodshed is going to come now that the war in East Pakistan technically is over, because of the great desire for revenge of the people of East Pakistan, and the fact that there are an awful lot of West Pakistani soldiers and civilian collaborators with the Pakistani Army there that are really in danger. In our trip up the river in these last couple of days, we saw a few floating bodies, and villagers of the area told us that these were not individuals killed by war, but they were men killed after the Pakistani troops had pulled out of the area. Villagers, people who were out for revenge, killed them because they had either collaborated with the Pakistani Army or actually formed a part of it.
Did you get any information as to what the Indian Army may do or be willing to do to set up protection for the West Pakistani soldiers and the collaborator civilians?
Yes, the first step is that they're taking the West Pakistani soldiers and putting them in the military cantonment. But what was very impressive about today was the fact that they did not disarm them immediately. They left the West Pakistanis with their guns, not to protect them from the Indians, of course, but to protect them from East Pakistani Bengali citizens.
What about the Indian soldiers and their attitude toward the Americans? You were traveling with them. Were they aware of the torment between our relations these days?
They're very much aware of it, and they do a bit of teasing and joking about it. You don't really feel a resentment a terrible anti-Americanism. They seem a bit perplexed by it. They seem annoyed by it. And because of it, because of the fact that the 7th Fleet is reportedly on its way, they were anxious to get the job done, their job being to take Dacca and win over East Pakistan in order to give it to the Bangladesh government and, by the way, take it away from India's old enemy, Pakistan.
Quint reported seeing fewer casualties, civilian or military, than he expected, and noted that the Indian forces tried to avoid population centers in their bombing and artillery strikes. He also visited the neutral Intercontinental Hotel in Dacca and said the American refugees there seemed in good shape. Mrs. Gandhi, in a note to President Nixon, has charged that America and other world powers could have prevented this war by exerting their influence to gain the release of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.